As all of you all know, musculoskeletal pain in children is common. And how common is it? If you look at recurrent pain syndromes, children having recurrent pain. This is the third commonest type of recurrent pain syndrome. The commonest being, of course, headache and recurrent abdominal pain, following which you have recurrent musculoskeletal pain. It affects almost 10 to 20% of our school children, and there are various causes for it, but it is important for us to make a correct diagnosis for the appropriate management. And it is also important to remember that all limb pain and joint pains are not arthritis, and that all arthritis are not painful. So, what is the objective of this class? Through this class, I hope to take you through the process of making a rheumatological diagnosis. And how to make a rheumatological diagnosis, 80% comes from the history taking. Okay, so a good history always solves a mystery, mostly in rheumatology. Then you have to look into the important extra-articular signs and symptoms and a thorough physical examination. This will help you catch the rest of the 15%, leaving us only 5% needed for a diagnosis. We need to do an investigation, okay? By doing a good history taking and a good and thorough physical examination and general examination, we should be, at the end of this class, able to recognize a pattern for the different causes of polyarthritis. So it is this pattern recognition which is extremely important in approaching a child with arthritis. Arthritis definition, all of us know, it's manifested as a swollen joint or a joint having at least of the two following conditions, that is limited range of movement, pain on movement, or warmth overlying the joint. Any two of these and we can call it arthritis. When an arthritis patient walked in the front door, I wanted to walk out of the back one. This was said by a very, very famous clinician. So arthritis then and now has been a very debilitating disease, which is difficult to treat. So coming to the clinical approach, I have around 12 questions which will come after this. The first part of any history taking is, of course, the personal history. So we start with the age. So what is the importance of age? Of course, age is extremely important because there are certain diseases which target certain age groups, starting with early childhood. If you have early childhood, am I audible? Hello? Hello?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible now.
Yeah, okay. Early childhood, it could be oligoarticular JIA, or it could be Kawasaki disease or septic arthritis. Mid-childhood, it could be polyarticular JIA, HSP, PAN. Late childhood, you have juvenile ankylosing spondylitis, SLE, other rheumatological diseases like rheumatoid factor positive polyarticular JIA, etc. So the age is extremely important for us to come to a differential diagnosis. The next, of course, in the personal history is the sex of the patient. Girls equals to rheumatological disorders, that is SLE, JIA, etc. While boys, most likely to be a vasculitis or a spondyloarthropathy. For systemic onset JIA, that is SOGIA, both male and female, it's almost equal preponderance. Coming to the family history is a very important part of the history taking in rheumatological diseases. You have the HLA-B27 associated diseases like acute anterior uveitis, ankylosing spondylitis. In a child with acute anterior uveitis, HLA-B27 positive, more than 6 years of age, boy child, the diagnosis is usually juvenile ankylosing spondylitis. Inflammatory bowel disease family history you must ask for. Psoriasis family history you must ask for. For we should know that in psoriasis, the arthritis may predate the skin lesions. That is, the arthritis may come before the skin lesions. Therefore, if there is a strong family history of psoriasis and a child comes with arthritis, we must definitely think of psoriatic arthropathy. Bleeding diastasis, this is a differential diagnosis, a mimic of arthritis, because it keeps bleeding into the same joint and the joint gets swollen. So you tend to think there's arthritis. A positive family history of rheumatoid arthritis may be seen in 25% of the patients with JIA, rheumatoid factor positive JIA. Certain classic pointers in the history: painful red eye with visual loss, JAS, that is juvenile ankylosing spondylitis, recent diarrhea, acute conjunctivitis, urethritis, and fever, reactive arthritis, pyrexia of unknown origin with multiple courses of antimicrobials, likely to be a SOGIA because the diagnosis was not there. People kept treating with multiple courses of antimicrobials. You must also ask for a history of any precipitating factors like trauma, infections like streptococcal infection, rheumatic fever, enteric pathogens, viral pathogens can all cause arthritis. Immunizations, especially MMR, drug exposures, exposure to a person with tuberculosis. So these are the points that you must not forget to ask during the history. Then we come to the masqueraders, those who mimic arthritis. So you need to know what are the red flag signs: fever, malaise, systemic symptoms, lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly, bone or joint pain with fever, unremitting or refractory pain, persistent night waking, night pain, or there is a discordance between the history and the presentation. All these could be red flag signs. Many of these are the symptoms and signs for SOGIA, but it could also be for malignancy. And the last could also be for child abuse. Therefore, we must keep in mind these red flag signs when you go through the history. Now I come to the crux of the issue, that is pattern recognition, how to recognize the pattern of arthritis. And there are 12 questions which will help you recognize the pattern. So we'll go through these questions one by one. With this, we will reach the DD. DD could be a definitive diagnosis or a differential diagnosis. So let us see what these 12 questions are. The first question, of course, is the involvement articular or non-articular. Articular involvement, how will you make that out? There will be pain, swelling, joint line tenderness. There will be limitation of active as well as passive movements. There could be swelling due to the synovitis, due to the joint effusion, due to the bony enlargement. There could be swelling. There could be instability of the joint. There could be locking, and there could be crepitus on examination and a deformity. Okay, if in these features are present, you are likely to be dealing with an articular problem. While in a non-articular problem, there will only be point tenderness, and the pain is usually only during active movement, not throughout active and passive movement. And the physical findings are usually away from the joint capsule, and you're unlikely to see swelling, crepitus, joint instability or deformity. So with this question and going through the checklist, we shall now decide whether we're dealing with an articular problem or a non-articular problem. And then we go to question number 2. Is it inflammatory or non-inflammatory? Okay. Inflammatory pathology is, of course, characterized by the morning stiffness or gelling, which is classic of JIA. In this, you have, when the child wakes up in the morning, they're all stiff. The joints are stiff and they're in great pain. And it takes them some time, at least more than an hour's time, and prolonged rest for it to become normal. So what is the pathophysiology of this morning stiffness? I don't know if all the PGs know this, but this is because of the normal diurnal variation, the circadian rhythm. At around 2 a.m. in the morning, our body releases melatonin, and that increases the pro-inflammatory cytokines. And all these IL-6, etc. are high in the morning, and therefore, at that time, the joints get very, very stiff. And they remain stiff till our 8 a.m. peak of cortisol. When the 8 a.m. peak of cortisol comes, then there is some relief for these patients. Okay. So morning stiffness and gelling, with stiffness lasting for more than 1 hour, usually needing prolonged rest, and pain. Pain is present throughout movement, but more at the end of movement. There could be diffuse joint swelling and tenderness, and systemic manifestations with elevated lab results, acute phase reactants, and synovial fluid, which if tapped would be inflammatory. In all these points, what you should remember that there could be a active inflammation, or right at the moment there could be no active inflammation. So to know if it's active inflammation, two things. If there's fluid in the joint and if there is pain which is increasing at the end of movement, it's likely to be active inflammation. Non-inflammatory or mechanical causes will cause stiffness, but never for an hour or so. It'll be just for half an hour, or maybe just sometime in the morning. And little bit of rest, they will become all right. And the pain is only during physical activity, and the child improves with rest. Variable clinical findings in the labs are usually normal. So with that, we decide if it's inflammatory or non-inflammatory. And the third, of course, is the time frame. Is it acute, subacute, or chronic? As we know, acute means more likely to be infections or Kawasaki or HSP or rheumatic fever. Subacute could be viral arthritis, reactive arthritis, and the beginning of some chronic illness like SLE. Chronic, of course, we all know JIA, AS, psoriasis, SLE, all of these will be chronic. Now, what you also need to remember that it's prudent not to give a label in the first few weeks, because this acute, it may be just an ongoing process and the disease is still evolving. So finally, it may become a chronic arthritis. The fourth question you need to ask is it acute monoarthritis, acute polyarthritis, chronic monoarthritis, chronic polyarthritis? How many joints are involved? Mono is one joint, oligo is 4 joints or less, and poly is 5 or more joints. So depending on that, you've got the various etiologies. It's just common sense. Monoarthritis, usually infective, trauma, reactive. JIA may start as a monoarthritis, and chronic monoarthritis, usually tubercular, septic arthritis, and reactive can be chronic. And then you have got acute polyarthritis, viral arthritis, rheumatic fever, mostly infective conditions, and chronic polyarthritis, the collagen vascular diseases and autoimmune diseases. So that's a fourth question. How many joints are involved? The fifth question that you need to ask yourself is there an axial involvement or peripheral involvement, or is it a combination of both? You can have a combination. So axial, of course, means the spine and the centrally located joints like the sacroiliac joint, the sternoclavicular joint, and the manubrium-sterni joint. This is most commonly seen in ERA, that is enthesitis-related arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, in adults in OA, osteoarthritis, and RA only the cervical spine is involved in rheumatoid arthritis. These joints are rarely affected in systemic diseases. That is the axial skeleton. The peripheral joints and the root joints, that is the shoulder and the hip joint, is usually seen in JIA involvement. An adolescent who has a chronic low back pain and peripheral asymmetric arthritis is likely to have one of those seronegative spondyloarthropathies, which can be easily remembered by an acronym called PEAR, P-E-A-R, that is PEAR, okay? P is psoriatic, E is ERA, enthesitis-related arthritis, A is ankylosing spondylitis, and R is reactive arthritis. So that's the young adolescent, what they get. Next, you need to ask yourself, is the involvement additive, migratory, or intermittent? I'm sure these terms are very familiar to the postgraduates. Additive means new joint involvement over and above the already involved joint, usually seen in polyarticular JIA, reactive arthritis, SLE, psoriasis. But what is classical is the migratory involvement, which is usually always referred to in acute rheumatic fever, the flitting and fleeting joint pain. Flit means moving from joint to joint, and fleet is in terms of with respect to time. It lasts only few hours in the joint. So in ARF, that is acute rheumatic fever, the pain lasts in each joint only less than a day. While there's another cause for migratory arthritis involvement, that is gonococcal arthritis. Here, it's not really fleeting. It can last for days, not fleeting like as it is in ARF. You can have an intermittent pattern when there's complete remission of symptoms followed by the next recurrence in the other joints. This complete remission, and then the next time the child gets fever, it's in some other joint, or fever or the pain, it's in some other joint, usually seen in SLE, reactive arthritis, and of course a hematological disorder, sickle cell disease. Question number 7 is a symmetric or asymmetric. Okay, now this symmetric joint involvement is usually seen with inflammatory connective tissue disorders and viral arthritis, Lyme's disease, and rheumatic fever, while asymmetric is seen with oligoarticular diseases like oligoarticular JIA, ERA, that is enthesitis-related arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, reactive arthritis, and maybe septic arthritis, and IE may also have asymmetric. In many cases, as with the case of the duration, the onset, the pattern of involvement may not be discernible at the beginning, and what you think is asymmetric may turn out to be symmetric. So let's wait a little before putting a label. Symmetric versus asymmetric. Now this chart will now tell us what we have talked about the disease pattern in these last few slides, the 7 slides. Okay, so here if you see the last column, it is upper and lower limb, and if you happen to see which are the arthritis which affect lower limb, you will see that classically it is 2, that is ERA, enthesitis-related arthritis, and reactive arthritis. So these 2, if only lower limb involvement is there throughout, then you should think of these 2, enthesitis-related arthritis and reactive arthritis. But what is the difference between the 2? The axial involvement, that is the next one, the column next to the upper limb and lower limb. You will see in enthesitis-related arthritis, there could be axial involvement, yes. While reactive arthritis, they've said no, but I know that SI could be there, sacroiliitis could be there in that. And otherwise, they're both asymmetrical, they are both large joint involvements, but ERA is usually a chronic arthritis, while reactive usually comes in the subacute range, okay? Another point I would like to make out is the difference between, say, polyarticular JIA and enthesitis-related arthritis, because they both are chronic arthritis and both can affect the large joints. Of course, polyarticular may affect the smaller joints also. Both can be asymmetrical, okay? But polyarticular JIA has got more of upper limb, could have upper limb involvement, while enthesitis-related arthritis usually has lower limb involvement, and polyarticular JI usually doesn't have axial involvement. So that is how you're able to reach a differential diagnosis using those 7 questions. At halfway through the talk, we have already have a sort of pattern of joint involvements in our minds. You'll get some more information if you ask certain other questions. In particular, is the disease involvement of any particular joint, is it characteristic of any disease? Yes, there are certain diseases like that. We know that in JIA, you can have the metacarpophalangeal joint and the proximal interphalangeal joint involvement. But if in addition to this, you're getting the distal interphalangeal joint involvement, this causes the whole digit to swell up. This is called as dactylitis or sausage finger, which is usually common with psoriatic arthritis, okay? So DIP involvement present, think of psoriatic arthritis. Look at the nails very carefully to see if they're splitting then, okay? Then bilateral temporomandibular joint involvement here, okay? Usually suggestive of RF negative polyarthritis. Then knee and joint involvement is usually oligoarticular diseases, so reactive arthritis or ERA. Tarsal joint involvement, again, usually seen as part of the enthesitis, and it could be in JAS, that is juvenile ankylosing spondylosis. So the certain joints which they involve will give you a clue to the diagnosis. So that is an important question you need to ask. That's psoriasis, and that's the tarsal joint involvement. Then we need to ask ourselves, is the arthritis deforming or non-deforming? Again, deforming arthritis is usually present with rheumatoid factor positive polyarticular JIA, while the systemic diseases like SLE and inflammatory bowel diseases usually do not deform the joint. And this deformities actually increase with the RF positivity and with the anti-CCP positivity. In addition to joint deformities, you must also look at limb length discrepancies, which there's a certain characteristic feature of oligoarticular JIA, in which initially the affected limb is long because of the hypovascularity in the inflamed joint. It leads to overgrowth of that joint, but finally it affects the epiphysis, and this premature fusion of the epiphysis, which will result in a shorter affected leg. Okay, so initial stages, the limb may be long, but finally it will get short. You may also have malalignment of the articular structures and associated fibrosis, which is called as ankylosis. So you must look for all these to know whether we are dealing with a deforming arthritis or no. The arthritis or psoriasis is actually very, very deforming. It's called as arthritis mutilans because it's almost mutilating. This is rheumatoid arthritis in adults. We don't see such deformities in children. We can, but it's unusual. So the 10th question that we ask is there any associated enthesitis? So how do we look for it? We looked for the presence of tenderness over the patella, the tibial tuberosity, the attachment of the Achilles tendon, the attachment of the plantar fascia to the base of the 5th metatarsal, at the heads of the metatarsal. Look for tenderness. If tenderness is present at the sites of the joining of these ligaments and tendons, then you think of a diagnosis of ERA. What you need to remember is it's seldom to have enthesitis of the upper extremities. Enthesitis is usually in the lower extremities. Are there, the question number 11, are there any extra-articular features and do they dominate the clinical picture? See, these clues are sometimes like, you just look at the patient and you get the diagnosis. The heliotrope rash, the malar rash of SLE, the proximal myopathy, then you know this is dermatomyositis. There are certain things which will, it just tells you the diagnosis. So a careful examination is necessary. We shall go through a few prominent ones. Eye is the most prominent. Of course, all of us know about KD, non-purulent conjunctivitis, but uveitis. When you have uveitis, get the ophthalmologist to see it. Is it anterior or posterior uveitis? Posterior uveitis is suggestive more of sarcoidosis. While anterior, you have two diagnoses. It could be ERA or OGM, that is oligoarticular JIA. Now, oligoarticular JIA, the uveitis is usually of an insidious onset, and the patient usually presents with a visual loss. While in ERA, that is an enthesitis-related arthritis, it is a painful red eye. Okay. And in both, you have got serological markers, that is ANA positivity in OJIA, and ERA, you have got HLA-B27 positive. If these two are positive in those respective conditions, the chances of eye involvement is much more. Then we come to the mouth, the oral lesions, painful cracked bleeding lips, strawberry tongue in KD, and ulcers. Ulcers you can see in SLE, methotrexate therapy, you see in Behçet's disease, you see in ERAs, you see in Reiter's, you see it in dermatomyositis. Many conditions. The red gum at the tooth line you see in dermatomyositis, alopecia, psoriatic rash, the classic heliotrope rash over the eyelids, the malar rash with the nasolabial fold sparing of SLE. Few pictures, as you can see the palatal ulcer of SLE, and you can see the genital ulcers seen in Reiter syndrome. And here you have got the classical butterfly rash with the malar sparing, the psoriatic rash, and erythema nodosum, which is seen in many conditions, connective tissue conditions, and also in granulomatous diseases like sarcoid and tuberculosis. Your heliotrope rash, the Grotton's papules of dermatomyositis, the photosensitivity of SLE. You've got rash, which could come on the trunk and the upper limbs, seen in a lot of conditions like SLE, Kawasaki disease, Sogia. You've got the classic rash of HSP, the edema that you see in acute hemorrhagic edema of infancy. You need to look at the nails very well. As I told you, sometimes in psoriatic arthritis, you don't have a positive family history, you don't have a skin rash, but you may say pitting. 90% of the patient with psoriasis will usually have nail pitting. So look for the nail pitting. Nail infarcts, you can look for telangiectasia on the nails, which is seen in dermatomyositis, erythema marginatum, subcutaneous nodules. The list is huge. But of course, a thorough examination will help you clinch the diagnosis. These are the classic skin lesions we see in Kawasaki, the pitting for psoriasis, the telangiectasia that we are seeing in dermatomyositis, alopecia. Do other system examinations, muscle, hematological, gastrointestinal, all of these will give you a differential diagnosis. Respiratory, cardiovascular, genitourinary, of course, for Reiter's, and SLE, and neurological. You can look, you can have chorea and SLE and acute rheumatic fever. So these, you go through the full system review, that's what I say. Do the system review and then you will have some clue coming up to tell you what your diagnosis is. And we finally that is how to now there's an organized way to examine it, which is called as. Okay, am I audible? I got a small message saying my internet is unstable. Hello?
Yes, Mary, you're audible.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So there is this method of examination of the musculoskeletal system which we call as the PGALs. I'm sure the PGs are familiar with it, but still I will go through it once more. And the regional examination of the musculoskeletal system, which is called as the PREMS. Okay, so shall we go through it? Now, a good musculoskeletal exam with PGALs takes only around 2 minutes. So it is necessary that you do the PGALs for all these indications. What are these indications? When an inflammatory joint disease is suspected, obviously we will do one. Other joint problems suspected, like say for example, hypermobility or orthopedic problems at the hip, or a child with MPS, it's likely to get joint involvement. In those children too, you must do the PGALs. An unwell child with pyrexia, a child with a limp, or a delay or regression of motor milestones. And this is because most often for Sojias, the mother will come and tell us this child was quite okay 2 weeks back. Since last 2 weeks, he's not walking at all. The child is not walking at all because he's in pain, but he doesn't know to say it, and the mother does not know why he is not walking. The clumsy child in the absence of a neurological disease, the child keeps tripping and falling. It could be due to arthritis. And the child with chronic disease and a known association with a musculoskeletal presentation such as IBD. These are the various indications in which you must do a PGALs. And the practical tips while performing a PGAL: don't hesitate to do one thinking it's a long procedure. It absolutely takes, if you do it properly, only 2 to 3 minutes. So it's worth doing one. Look for verbal and non-verbal clues of discomfort, because child may not be able to express himself. Therefore, look at the facial expression of withdrawal for pain. Do the full screen, because don't depend on the mother's history. She may say the lower limb is involved, but please look at the upper limb, look at the spine, look at the axial skeleton. Look for asymmetry. Look for clinical patterns. Okay, so these are the practical tips while performing the PGALs. All of y'all must be knowing the 3 screening questions. The 3 screening questions are very simple. Pain and stiffness present in joints, muscle, or back. Is it there or no? You ask them. Is there a difficulty in dressing oneself? And finally, is there difficulty in going up and down the stairs? Now, there are certain cultural issues in this. For us, if it's a the family may not have steps at home for the child to go up and down, then you can ask, does the child squat and get up without much problem? Okay. And difficulty in dressing oneself, like very often children are fully dressed by parents till around 5, 6, 7 years of age. So you get around these things, and the gist of the question should be this. Next, we have to observe the gait. So while observing the gait, I suggest you stand first in the front of the patient. You make him walk across the length of the room. And then when he walks back, you watch his back, okay? And you also should, at a certain point, stand at the side of the patient and have a look at the patient, because this will let you know if he's limping or if there is some flexion deformity anywhere, okay? Ask the child to walk on tiptoes and heels, okay? So this is the procedure for gait. And for arms, you've got a set of around 12 maneuvers, starting with put your hands out and then put it up and then make a fist. And then basically it's movements, plus you're looking for tenderness, right? And then you're looking for the flexibility. You're making the child put the hands up and look up. So you're testing the spine. Then you're testing lateral flexion on both sides, and you ask them to open the mouth and see if the child is able to open the mouth, and you're able to put 3 of his fingers in. Okay, so all this is basically testing for all the joints. Followed, then you make the patient lie down, and 3 tests on the legs: the patellar tap to look for fluid, active movement of the knee joint, and passive movement at the hips. That you have to test yourself. Then make the patient stand up and ask him to do a flexion, lateral flexion, and then touch the toes. So this is there in this chart, okay, all the steps that you're supposed to do. And after doing this, what's most important is to document it, okay? You please document it at that visit, what the patient told you. Is there any pain? Yes, left knee pain. Any problem with dressing? No difficulty. Any problem with walking? Some difficulty in walking, okay? And we have noted that the gait, the movement, there's some it's a cross, it's not totally normal, and the legs are cross and cross, but upper arms are okay and the spine is okay. So you have noted this, you've documented this in the child's chart, and when they come 6 months or 1 year later, this is there in the chart. So documentation of PGAL screen is extremely important. Then we come to PREMS. PREMS is based on the look, feel, move, and function for each joint, and then with focused examination of the affected joint. You look for warmth, tenderness, redness, swelling, soft tissue involvement. You look at the opposite side, do active movements, and then do the passive movements, and then do the measurements. Okay, so that is PREMS. So after doing all these 12 steps, I hope you will be able to come to a pattern recognition. So I have just put 4 or 5 little patterns for us to recognize, and I'm sure you all will be able to recognize these patterns. A pattern of scattered, asymmetric, large, and small oligoarticular or limited polyarthritis, especially of the distal interphalangeal joint. Now that's the clue. Distal interphalangeal joint usually means, okay, juvenile psoriatic arthritis. The next pattern, polyarthritis in a teenage girl. This is the ages. That age is so important. You'll think of SLE or polyarticular JIA. Then you have got an inflammatory tarsal involvement and enthesopathy in the absence of axial disease. It could help you distinguish. This inflammatory tarsal involvement will help you distinguish between juvenile ankylosing spondylitis and JIA. In JIA, you're unlikely to have the enthesopathy. If you have an isolated hip involvement, it's likely to be toxic synovitis or Perthes or slip capital physis. It could also be a chronic inflammatory arthritis like ankylosing spondylitis, but less likely. An older child or young adolescent male with low back pain may be having ankylosing spondylitis, but let's not forget the masqueraders. It could be a mechanical cause, it could be infection or malignancy. They are more likely. We must rule them out. So these are some of the pattern recognitions that I did for you. And now we come to the differential diagnosis of arthritis. What is the differential diagnosis of arthritis? Arthritis itself, that is A for avascular necrosis or orthopedic causes, R for reactive arthritis, T for trauma, H for hematological causes, including sickle cell disease, rickets, R for rickets or metabolic or endocrine causes, I for infections, T for tumors, I for idiopathic, including JIA, and S for SLE or other autoimmune or connective tissue disorders. So this is the acronym that will help us remember the differential diagnosis for arthritis. Of course, you could have a page full of differentials like this, single joint, multiple joint involvement, with fever, without fever. But what I basically talked right now is all there in this chart, but very confusing. Coming to, as I told you, with a good history and a good clinical examination using these 12 questions, we have reached to a, by 95% of the cases, you will be able to diagnose clinically in arthritis, okay? The other 5 may need some little bit of investigation backup, and this investigation backup has also got, you need not do everything for every arthritis. So you do and you examine and you decide whether there is arthritis or no. Is there synovitis? Symptoms are lasting for more than 6 weeks. You think of a systemic rheumatic disease. You do the CBC, ESR, rheumatoid factor, anti-CCP, and or ANA, depending upon the clinical scenario. Urine analysis, creat, and a joint aspiration may be done. Joint aspiration, the inflammatory cells are around 2000. It's likely to be inflammatory disorder. While if it's about 10,000, it's likely to be a septic disorder problem. While if you have something like a less than 6-week arthritis, you just need to do some basic investigations and follow them up. While if you don't have arthritis, but just tender points, you just need to rule out certain diseases involving the liver, thyroid, and I mean, even if there is some investigations come positive, they always say in rheumatology, don't treat the investigation, treat the patient, okay? So we also need to know when to refer, because we are just ordinary pediatricians, and everything may not be, we may not, we may have a doubt in our mind. We may not be sure. The relative may want us to take a second opinion. So let us be open about it. If our diagnosis is unclear, at the end of all your 12 questions, your diagnosis is still unclear, you've done some basic investigations, you're not too sure still. If there is, you're sure you've diagnosed it, but it's a long-term management, okay, then it may be better to refer to a rheumatological specialist. This is because we as pediatricians are very busy seeing patients. I mean, the time that we can give a single patient is limited, but these patients will need not only one doctor, but multiple doctors to look after them. Then autoimmune diseases associated with other primary diseases. As I told you, you can have mucopolysaccharidosis with joint involvement, genetic disorders, or you can have IBD with joint involvement. You may need to refer. Provide a second opinion, that's very important, or confirmatory evaluations are necessary from a higher center. You may need to refer the patient. And for rheumatological emergencies, rheumatological emergency, of course, you can handle yourself, and we do handle. What are the rheumatological emergencies we handle? Septic arthritis we can handle. Bleeding into a joint we can handle. Then infective endocarditis, yes, we handle. Then Kawasaki disease, definitely we handle. Then HSP with complications. HSP arthritis by itself is not an emergency, but if the complications set in, yes, we have handled that too. And of course, then the big dad, the granddaddy of all the complications of rheumatologists, what they love. Yes, macrophage activation syndrome. Right now we have a patient in our ICU with MAS, and we are treating it. But of course, our colleagues from the rheumatology department are also on it. But yes, that is the biggest emergency that they have. They need to treat an MAS very quickly. What are the take-home messages of this class today? That recognition of pattern is extremely important. Extra-articular manifestations may help you clinch the diagnosis. And several rheumatological diseases, I mean, you may not be able to make the diagnosis on day one because it evolves with time. Then arthritis is a great mimicker or a masquerader. So we must rule out other things like leukemia, tuberculosis, etc. And you must identify a musculoskeletal emergency, because that may need to be dealt very, very quickly. So with this message, I finish my talk today. I thank you all for the patient listening, and I hope you all have enjoyed my talk. This little girl is Shalu, a patient of ours, who's 7 years of age, and she's doing a namaste, but you can see that because of the ankylosis of her wrist, she's not able to do a perfect namaste. She's only able to do it like this. Okay, so these are the residual deformities that are left behind, even if you treat them properly sometimes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You have made it very simple, a very complicated one with just the 12 questions. It's really, really very good. Now, if there are any questions from the audience there in the room or anybody in the Zoom, I think we have a question in the chat box. Is joint swelling a must for calling it an articular pain among the other symptoms, signs you mentioned, or for a diagnosis of JIA in a child?
No, there are 3 of them: joint swelling, pain, and warmth. If you have 2 of them, that's more than enough for diagnosis. You don't need all the 3.
So in a child with recurrent post-articular joint pain with no joint swelling, is there an entity called recurrent synovitis? Usually we hear from the ortho, or is it a precursor of JA? What would you need for diagnosis? Because recurrent is quite common diagnosis.
Recurrent synovitis. Synovitis is articular involvement anyway. Yeah. So what is the cause for the recurrent synovitis, we need to know. And there could be many infective, or it could be a reactive arthritis. And it could also be in the evolution, process of evolution. As I told you, rheumatological diseases do evolve over time. So you just need to wait and see what's happening. The person answered the question themselves by saying that, do we need to wait? Yes, you need to wait. You need to investigate and wait, not just wait.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Any further questions from the PGs in the room or anybody in Zoom? you can unmute yourself and then answer the questions. Yes.
That's it, I think. It was a very simple topic, so there's not likely to be too many questions. And since I was talking to postgraduates, I wasn't sure also if all of them are exam going right now, but anyway, I thought it will help them in their clinical exam cases to know how to examine and what questions to ask in the history. So that's why I kept it simple. And of course, I'm not qualified also as a rheumatologist to talk about detailed rheumatological investigations. So this is the way we approach the case, isn't it, sir? Isn't the way,
No.
I mean, most of us approach it this way. So
I think this is better than a rheumatologist talking, because they make it too confusing with all high-level things. So I really feel
yeah, no, but this, you have to get through this first thing, then
yes.
maybe we need
Yeah,
to,
that's right.
yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, anybody else? There's one thank you, ma'am, from Sarika.
Okay. She's at Mehta's, I think. She's doing her DNB there. She was a DCH student in Ambala.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Gayatri, would you like to ask? Okay. So, ma'am, in that case, we'll conclude the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.